For 3 decades, Johnny Carson wasn't just a talk show host. He was America's nightly companion. His Midwestern charm, quick wit, and sharp timing made him feel like part of the family. But behind that comforting presence was a man fiercely private, guarded to the point of mystery. Carson often said he played a version of Johnny Carson on stage. The real Johnny? Almost no one got to see him. And yet, there were rare moments, rare guests, who broke through the mask. What Carson said to them in those final exchanges reveals more about him than thousands of hours of broadcast. Johnny Carson built his career on control. On camera, he was quick, witty, and almost untouchable. Off camera, he kept people at a distance. Even those who worked with him for decades admitted they never really knew him. Fred de Cordova, his longtime producer, once said Carson created a character called Johnny Carson and played him night after night. The real man, he explained, was thoughtful, sometimes melancholy, and very careful about who he let inside. That's why his relationships with certain guests are so fascinating. Out of over 22,000 people who walked onto that stage, only a handful earned genuine admiration. These weren't just guests. They were Johnny's guests. Of all the appearances across 30 years, one stands above the rest. It was 1981 when Jimmy Stewart came on The Tonight Show. Stewart, with his soft voice and humble presence, read a simple poem about his golden retriever, Bo. The verses were tender, describing the quirks of a dog now gone and the emptiness left behind. As Stewart read, Carson shifted in his chair. The usually unshakable host suddenly looked vulnerable. Then it happened. His eyes filled. For a brief moment, Johnny Carson teared up on national television. When Stewart finished, Carson's words were almost a whisper. "Thank you for sharing that, Jimmy." It was the rarest glimpse of Johnny's true self, unscripted, raw, and human. Backstage, staff recalled Carson embracing Stewart and telling him, "I'll never forget that. You just gave us something real." For a man who had built walls higher than Hollywood itself, this moment was groundbreaking. While Stewart brought out Carson's heart, others brought out his wild side. Burt Reynolds was one of them. Known for his swagger and humor, Reynolds broke the rules of The Tonight Show. He threw shaving cream, started water fights, and cracked Johnny up in ways no one else dared. Instead of being annoyed, Carson reveled in it. He once told a producer, "Burt gets the game, most guests don't." Reynolds knew that the best TV wasn't in the rehearsed stories, it was in the unpredictable moments. Then there was Dean Martin. With his half-lit grin and happy drunk act, Martin didn't take the talk show format seriously at all. He'd miss his chair, forget questions, derail segments, and Johnny loved it. In fact, Carson once said to him, "Don't change, Dino. The world needs at least one guy who never takes it seriously." With Reynolds and Martin, Johnny dropped the polished mask. You could see it in his laughter, his body language. For those brief exchanges, The Tonight Show became as spontaneous as life itself. But Johnny wasn't just drawn to mischief. He had deep respect for certain legends who represented the roots of comedy. Jack Benny was one. His perfect timing, his legendary pauses, Carson studied him obsessively early in his career. After Benny's final Tonight Show visit, Carson reportedly told him privately, "You taught me how to listen." For Carson, that was the highest praise. Then there was George Burns. Into his 90s, Burns kept performing, still sharp, still funny. Johnny treated him like comedy royalty. On air, Carson once told him, "George, you're the only guy I know who gets funnier every year." Later, he remarked to staff that Burns made him believe age was just another punchline. And Lucille Ball, the queen of sitcoms. When she came on, Johnny treated her as an equal. Backstage after one of her last visits, he said simply, "You're the real deal, Lucy." Always were. For a man who rarely let his guard down, those words were as close to pure admiration as he ever expressed. Two others connected with Carson in a different way, not through chaos or reverence, but through kinship. Bob Newhart shared Carson's dry, understated style. Both men knew how to make silence funnier than a punchline. Johnny once called Newhart the most effortlessly funny man I know. Backstage, after Newhart's final Tonight Show appearance, Carson told him, "Nobody made it look easier, but I know how hard you worked." That was Johnny, recognizing in Bob what he knew about himself, the craft behind the illusion of effortlessness. Then came Carol Burnett. Warm, witty, and fearless, Burnett was one of the only people Johnny trusted enough to let run wild on his stage. He'd give her freedom to interact with the audience, stretch her segments, and even take control of the show. After her last visit, Carson reportedly said, "If I could build a show around just one person, it would be you." That trust spoke volumes. With Burnett, Carson knew he'd never be let down. Not all of Johnny's favorites were simple. Take Bob Hope. Carson grew up idolizing him and always showed respect on camera. But privately, he sometimes felt Hope's style had grown outdated. Still, after Hope's final Tonight Show performance, Johnny said backstage, "Thanks for everything, Bob. You never missed, ever." It was classic Carson, a line that captured both respect and subtle distance. He valued Hope's consistency, even if he didn't always love the rigid style. When you piece these exchanges together, a picture emerges. Carson admired craftsmanship in Jack Benny and Bob Newhart. He cherished authenticity in Carol Burnett and Jimmy Stewart. He respected unpredictability in Burt Reynolds and Dean Martin. And he honored legacy in Lucille Ball, George Burns, and Bob Hope. But more than anything, these moments showed Johnny Carson's selective vulnerability. He rarely let anyone behind the mask, but when he did, his words were strikingly honest. Whether it was whispering to Jimmy Stewart that he'd never forget his poem, or quietly telling Lucille Ball she was the real deal, these weren't just polite lines. They were the truth, spoken by a man who almost never revealed himself. For 30 years, America thought it knew Johnny Carson. But in truth, the real man only surfaced in flashes, in the laughter he shared with Reynolds and Martin, in the reverence he gave to Benny and Burns, in the admiration he held for Lucy and Carol, and in the tear he shed for Jimmy Stewart. His final words to his favorite guests weren't scripted, polished, or meant for the cameras. They were rare glimpses of Johnny Carson, the person, not the performer. And maybe that's his greatest legacy. Not just his perfect timing or his golf swing or his unmatched hosting skills, but the fact that when he let his guard down, even for a second, it was unforgettable. Because in those fleeting moments, we weren't just watching a talk show host, we were watching Johnny Carson the man.